There's a peculiar moment that arrives in every ambitious life. You're moving forward, working harder than you ever have, making sacrifices that no one sees. Yet when you look around, the room is empty. Mentors aren't appearing. Cheerleaders aren't calling your name. The hand you expected to reach down and pull you higher never comes. And in that hollow silence, a question emerges. Can I really get ahead when I'm completely on my own? But what if that very isolation isn't your obstacle? What if it's your advantage? Carl Jung understood something profound about the human journey. He wrote that the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. When we're stripped of external support, we're forced into a kind of suffering that refines us. Not the suffering of victimhood, but the creative tension that births a stronger self. Today, we're walking through 6 principles, drawn from Jungian psychology and the lives of those who've climbed without a ladder. These aren't platitudes or quick fixes. They're the hidden mechanics of advancement, when you have nothing but your own will and the wisdom to use it correctly. Because the truth is, getting ahead alone isn't just possible for some of us. It's the only way forward that leads to something real. 1. Embrace the burden of your own potential. Have you ever felt the weight of what you could become pressing down on your chest in the middle of the night? That restlessness that won't let you sleep, that voice whispering you're meant for more, even when there's evidence to support it, encouragement to fuel it, or proof to validate it. Most people never get ahead because they're waiting for permission, for resources, for someone to recognize their talent and open the door. But Jung taught that psychological maturity begins when you stop projecting your power onto others and take full ownership of your potential with all its weight. He called this the process of withdrawing projections. We spend years unconsciously believing that our success depends on external factors, the right boss, the perfect opportunity, someone who finally understands us. But these are projections, ways we avoid the frightening reality that we alone must activate what's dormant within us. Think of potential as a living thing inside you, restless and demanding. It doesn't care about your excuses or your comfort. Every day you don't act on it, that energy turns inward, becomes anxiety, becomes that gnawing feeling that you're betraying yourself. That restlessness you feel, it's not a problem to solve, it's a signal to move. When no one is there to push you, the universe is actually asking a sacred question. Will you push yourself? Will you carry the full weight of what you could become? I once read about a programmer who worked in a factory for 6 years, breathing in metal dust and machine oil. Every evening after his shift, exhausted down to his bones, he'd go home and teach himself to code. Documentation open on a cracked laptop screen, tutorial videos playing at 1.5 speed, determination that bordered on obsession. His co-workers thought he was wasting his time. You need connections, they'd say over lunch. You need a degree. You're fooling yourself. But he understood something they didn't. His potential wasn't waiting for external validation. It was a seed already planted in darkness, and whether anyone believed in it or not, he had to water it. Thousands of hours passed in that small apartment. Tutorials at midnight, debugging until dawn, building projects no one would ever see. After 2 years of applications, the first 12 companies rejected him. Form letters, mostly. A few didn't even respond, but the 13th hired him. Within 3 years, he was leading a team, teaching others what he'd learned in solitude. He later said something that captures this principle perfectly. The hardest part wasn't learning to code. It was carrying the belief that I could do it when everyone around me, people I loved and respected, thought I was foolish. That belief had to come from somewhere deeper than logic. That's the burden Jung spoke of. Potential feels heavy because it demands you become someone you're not yet. It asks you to believe in a future version of yourself that doesn't exist, to invest in them when no one else will, to hold faith in the invisible. Most people can't bear that weight. They need witnesses, cheerleaders, validators. But the ones who get ahead alone, they become their own witness. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he didn't say it would be comfortable or celebrated. Becoming requires you to hold your own possibility, even when it makes you lonely, even when others call it arrogance or delusion, even when months pass with nothing to show for your efforts, because potential doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It whispers in empty rooms at 3 a.m., asking if you're brave enough to believe when belief makes no logical sense. And every time you say yes to that whisper, despite the silence around you, you forge another link in the chain that will eventually pull you upward. If you've ever felt that burden, that weight of unlived potential pressing on your chest, leave one word in the comments: carrying. Let it be a signal that you're still holding what others couldn't see, still believing when belief is the hardest thing. 2, use isolation as a laboratory for self-knowledge. When you're getting ahead alone, you have something others don't: uninterrupted access to yourself. The chorus of opinions that usually drowns out your inner voice goes silent. The crowd that typically pressures you toward their definition of success isn't there. The room is quiet enough to finally hear your own thoughts. Jung believed that true individuation, becoming a fully realized self, requires what he called going into the desert. Periods of isolation, where you're forced to confront who you actually are beneath the roles and masks. Most people fear this confrontation. They fill every silence with noise, every moment alone with distraction, scrolling, consuming, anything to avoid the mirror. But those who get ahead alone learn to mine their solitude for insights others never discover. They turn isolation into research. In those quiet hours, patterns emerge. You learn your actual rhythms. Are you sharper when the sun is still below the horizon, or do you come alive when others are winding down? Do you think better while your body is moving, or do you need absolute stillness? What truly motivates you when nobody is watching? Nobody to impress, applause waiting at the end? These aren't trivial questions. They're the foundation of personal efficiency. A person who knows themselves intimately, who understands their own operating system, can accomplish in 4 focused hours what takes others days of scattered effort. Consider the story of a writer who lost her publishing contract after her first book failed commercially. The advance had been modest, the reviews lukewarm, the sales disappointing. Suddenly, the lunches with editors stopped, the agent's calls dried up like a stream in summer. She found herself alone with her craft and her doubts, and the silence felt like judgment. For months, she felt paralyzed, sitting at her desk, but unable to write. Every sentence felt fake, performative, written for an audience that had already turned away. The rejection had stripped away her confidence, but it had also stripped away something else, her pretense. Then she started an experiment. She wrote every day at dawn before the world woke up and reminded her of her failure. But she didn't write for publication. She wrote to understand her own creative process, to excavate what was actually happening inside her when words came alive. What subjects genuinely excited her? What voice felt authentic rather than manufactured? What questions did she care about more than success? She filled notebooks with terrible drafts, pages she knew no one would ever read. But slowly, a pattern emerged, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Her best work came when she stopped trying to write what she thought would sell and started exploring questions that haunted her personally, obsessively. Questions about grief, about inherited trauma, about the lies we tell to survive. 2 years later, she self-published a novel written entirely for herself. It found a small, devoted audience, then a larger one, then readers who said, "This book knows me." Eventually, publishers who'd ignored her came calling, but she'd changed. She no longer needed their validation because she'd discovered something more valuable: complete clarity about her creative identity. "I thought losing my career was the end," she told me, "but it was actually the beginning. Because I'd been writing for everyone except myself, the isolation forced me to ask who I was when no one was watching. That's when my real voice emerged." This is what Jung meant by the confrontation with the unconscious. When external structures fall away, you're left facing the raw material of yourself. your fears, your genuine desires, your unprocessed emotions, the shadow parts you've been hiding. Most people rebuild the external scaffolding as quickly as possible to avoid this encounter. But those who get ahead use it as research. They ask, what am I actually afraid of beneath the surface? Excuses. What do I want versus what do I think I should want? What stories am I telling myself that keep me small? Which of my beliefs are mine and which are borrowed? From a practical standpoint, isolation forces you to become self-reliant in ways that later become competitive advantages. You learn to motivate yourself without cheerleaders standing nearby. You develop internal standards instead of constantly measuring yourself against others. You become comfortable with delayed gratification because there's no one promising you quick rewards, no one handing out participation trophies. These aren't just character traits. They're the psychological infrastructure of long-term success. Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." But when you're getting ahead alone, you flip this equation. You learn to communicate with yourself about what's important. You become both the speaker and the listener, the teacher and the student. And paradoxically, this self-conversation makes you more interesting when you do connect with others. You have something real to say because you've actually thought deeply while everyone else was busy networking. You've discovered what you believe, not what you're supposed to believe. So if you're in that desert right now, wandering through isolation that feels endless, understand this: you're not lost, you're being refined. Every quiet hour is teaching you something about yourself that you'll use for the rest of your life. The loneliness you feel isn't emptiness, it's space. And in that space, if you're patient enough to listen, your truest self is finally learning to speak. 3. Master the art of self-directed progress. Without a boss setting goals, without a mentor charting the path, without peers creating benchmarks, you face a dangerous freedom. Total autonomy can become total drift if you're not careful. This is where most solo journeys stall, not from lack of talent, but from lack of structure. Jung understood that the unconscious without consciousness is chaos. Raw potential without direction dissipates like steam. So when you're getting ahead alone, you must become what he called a conscious participant in your own development. You need systems, rituals, and feedback loops that replace the external architecture others rely on. But here's what's different about self-directed progress. You're not following someone else's blueprint. You're building the path by walking it, which means you need to become both the traveler and the cartographer. Start with what I call progress archaeology. Every week, document what you've actually done. Not what you planned to do or wished you'd done, but what concretely happened. This practice surfaces patterns your conscious mind misses. You might discover you're consistently productive on certain days and scattered on others. You might notice that particular types of work energize you while others drain you for days afterward. A graphic designer I know, working freelance without agency backing, felt perpetually behind. She'd work long hours, falling into bed exhausted, but couldn't measure if she was improving or just spinning her wheels. Months blurred together without milestones. The isolation made everything feel meaningless. So she created what she called her evidence journal. Every Friday evening, she'd screenshot her week's work, write one paragraph about what she learned, and note one specific skill she wanted to develop next. Simple, concrete, honest. After 6 months, she could literally see her evolution laid out across pages. The early work looked amateurish compared to what she was creating now. More importantly, she'd created an internal promotion system. She was advancing herself through conscious observation and adjustment, giving herself the feedback no boss was there to provide. "I realized I wasn't standing still," she said. "I was growing in the darkness. I just couldn't see it day to day." This connects to Jung's idea of the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to generate new solutions by holding tension between opposites. When you're alone, you must consciously create that tension. Set goals that stretch you but don't break you, then hold yourself accountable, not through shame or punishment, but through honest assessment. Did you do what you said you'd do? If not, Why? Not to judge yourself harshly, but to understand the resistance and adjust your approach. Maybe the goal was unrealistic. Maybe you're avoiding something. Maybe you need to break it down differently. This self-inquiry is how you evolve. The key is replacing external pressure with internal integrity. When you have a boss, you work to meet their expectations, and you can resent them for demanding too much. When you have only yourself, you work to maintain self-respect. This is actually a more powerful motivator because you can't lie to yourself as easily as you can deceive others. Your unconscious knows the truth. If you're coasting, pretending, or making excuses, a part of you registers the betrayal. That's the part that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with anxiety. It's not punishing you. It's trying to tell you something. You're not honoring the promise you made to yourself. Build what I call evidence of selfhood. Small daily proofs that you are who you claim to be. If you say you're a developer, did you write code today? If you call yourself an entrepreneur, did you take one action that moved your business forward? These aren't about grand gestures. They're about consistent, small demonstrations that build an identity you can trust. Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." When no one is watching, your actions become the only honest mirror. Every commitment you keep to yourself strengthens the relationship between your conscious intentions and your unconscious power. Every commitment you break fractures it. Over time, this determines everything. Because the person who can trust themselves to follow through has access to a reservoir of energy others can't tap. They know that when they decide something, it happens. That certainty isn't arrogance. It's earned self-knowledge. And it's what propels them past obstacles that stop everyone else. Think of it like this. Most people need external accountability because they don't trust themselves. But when you've proven to yourself, through hundreds of small kept promises, that you follow through, you become unstoppable. You're no longer dependent on anyone else's belief or support. You've become your own foundation. So if you're building alone right now, trying to direct your own progress with no one telling you if you're on track, remember this. The goal isn't perfection. It's consciousness. Pay attention to what you're actually doing, adjust thoughtfully, and keep the promises you make to yourself. That's the path forward when the path has no markers. 4. Develop strategic patience while taking daily action. Here's where many solo journeys die, in the desperate gap between effort and recognition. You're working harder than everyone around you, pouring yourself into something you believe in, but the results aren't matching the input. Weeks become months, months stretch into years, and the temptation to either give up or take shortcuts becomes overwhelming. Why isn't this working? Why is everyone else moving faster? Did I make a mistake? Jung distinguished between what he called active imagination and passive fantasy. Passive fantasy is daydreaming about success while scrolling through others' highlight reels. Active imagination is holding a vision of what's possible while simultaneously doing the work in reality, day after grinding day. When you're getting ahead alone, you need this dual capacity to be patient with the timeline while being aggressive with the daily action. Most people can do one or the other. They're either patient but passive or urgent but scattered. The ones who break through can hold both. Strategic patience means understanding that compound effects are invisible until they're not. A tree spends years growing roots before it breaks the surface. You're doing the same. Every skill you're building, every connection you're making, every project you're completing is root work. The world doesn't applaud roots. They can't see them. But without them, nothing stands. I'm reminded of a chef who worked in restaurant kitchens for 8 years with advancement always just out of reach. Line cook, prep work, cleaning grease traps at 2 a.m. He'd watch younger chefs get promoted around him, their parents knowing restaurant owners or their culinary school pedigrees opening doors. His background couldn't. He'd try to implement new techniques he learned from books, but head chefs would dismiss him. We're not that kind of restaurant, they'd say, not even tasting what he'd made. He felt invisible, like he was shouting into wind. But instead of becoming bitter, he made a private decision. Every day after his shift, exhausted and smelling like fryer oil, he'd practice one advanced technique at home. Sous vide, fermentation, molecular gastronomy, things his current restaurant didn't use and probably never would. He documented everything in a worn notebook, building a private portfolio of skills. For years, nothing changed externally. Same position, same dismissive head chefs, same paycheck that barely covered rent. But internally, he was becoming someone else entirely. His hands were learning a language his current environment didn't speak. Then a food critic happened to eat at his restaurant and noticed something unusual about the staff meal he'd prepared for the team. Not the menu items, just what he made for the other cooks. The seasoning was complex. The technique was refined. She asked who made it. One conversation led to another. Within 6 months, he had investors for his own restaurant. But here's what he said later, and this is crucial. Those 8 years weren't wasted. They were my real education. If I'd been promoted earlier, I would have stopped growing. The isolation, the being overlooked, forced me to become undeniable. This is strategic patience. It's not passive acceptance or wishful thinking. It's active preparation during the waiting period. You're not sitting around hoping someone notices you. You're becoming undeniable, whether anyone notices or not. There's a crucial psychological difference here. Passive waiting makes you a victim of time, watching it pass with resentment. Strategic patience makes you a beneficiary of it, using every day to compound your capabilities. Jung taught that the psyche operates on its own timeline, not the ego's preferred schedule. Your conscious mind wants immediate results, wants proof that this is working, wants the validation now, but your unconscious is brewing something deeper, integrating experiences, connecting patterns, preparing capabilities you'll need later but can't yet imagine. When you honor this process instead of fighting it, you stop feeling behind and start feeling prepared. The people who get ahead alone understand that obscurity is actually a gift in disguise. It gives you permission to fail privately, to experiment without judgment, to build slowly without the pressure of an audience. You can try things that don't work. You can look foolish. You can completely change direction without explaining yourself to investors or followers or anyone else. Many successful people look back on their invisible years as the most important of their lives, not despite the lack of recognition, but because of it. Those years shaped them in ways success never could have. So when you're working in silence, watching others get ahead faster, feeling like you're falling behind, remember this: you're not behind. You're underground. And underground is where the strongest foundations are built. Every person who rushed to the surface too early eventually regrets it. Their foundation wasn't ready. But the ones who use their hidden years wisely, they emerge with roots so deep that storms can't topple them. Strategic patience isn't about being slow. It's about being thorough. It's about understanding that getting ahead isn't a sprint with a clear finish line. It's becoming someone capable of staying ahead once you get there. And that becoming takes time that no one can shortcut. Hit like on this video if you've ever felt like you're moving too slowly, if you've doubted whether your invisible work matters. That doubt is normal, but the work still counts, even when no one's counting it but you. 5. Transform setbacks into strategic intelligence. When you're getting ahead with support, failure has cushions. Your network catches you. Your mentor reframes the loss. Your team shares the blame, spreading the weight across multiple shoulders. But when you're alone, every setback lands with full force. The impact is yours alone to absorb. And in that moment of falling, with nobody helping you up, nobody saying, "It'll be okay," you face a choice that defines everything that follows. What will you do with this failure? This is where Jung's concept of enantiodromia becomes essential. It's the principle that everything eventually becomes its opposite if pushed far enough. Strength becomes weakness when unbalanced. Confidence becomes arrogance. And crucially, failure can become advantage if properly metabolized. But you must do the metabolizing yourself. No one will do it for you. The people who get ahead alone develop what I call failure literacy, the ability to extract usable intelligence from what went wrong. This isn't toxic positivity or forced reframing. It's forensic analysis, cold and honest. What specifically failed? What did that reveal about my assumptions? What capability do I now know I need to develop? What approach won't I try again? Think of an entrepreneur who launched 3 businesses that failed before his 4th succeeded. Each failure cost him his savings, time he couldn't get back, relationships that frayed under financial stress. Investors stopped returning his calls after the 3rd collapse. Potential partners made excuses when he pitched new ideas. He was carrying the full weight of repeated defeat, and the burden was his alone. But here's what he did differently than most. After each failure, he spent a week writing what he called a post-mortem report. Not to dwell or wallow, but to dissect with surgical precision. What killed this? Where was my thinking flawed? What did I miss? The first business failed because he built a product nobody wanted, something he thought was brilliant, but the market found useless. Lesson: validate demand before building. Talk to customers before writing a single line of code. The second failed because he couldn't attract good talent. People would join, sense something off, and leave within weeks. Lesson: develop leadership and communication skills. Learn how to cast vision that inspires people to stay through difficulty. The third failed because he ran out of cash at the worst possible moment, 6 weeks before break-even. Lesson: understand financial management deeply. Build longer runways. Never assume funding will arrive when you need it. By the time he started his 4th venture, he wasn't just older. He was genuinely wiser. Each failure had given him capabilities. His competitors, who'd had easier paths and early success, never developed. They knew how to succeed. He knew how to fail forward. And in the long run, that knowledge proved more valuable. My competitors are smarter than me, he told me, but they've never had to get back up alone. That's my advantage. This is what Jung meant when he wrote, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." When you're alone, you stop looking for universal formulas and start developing personalized wisdom. Your failures aren't just setbacks. They're custom-designed lessons for your specific weaknesses, tailored precisely to what you need to learn. From a neurological perspective, failure, when examined rather than avoided, actually rewires your brain. It activates the prefrontal cortex, strengthening your capacity for pattern recognition and future planning, but only if you engage with it consciously, analytically. If you just feel bad and move on, you get the pain without the growth. The key is the gap between the failure and your next attempt. That's where the learning lives. Most people either quit immediately or rush to try again without reflection. Both miss the intelligence failure is offering. Many people who succeed alone say the same thing. My failures taught me more than my successes. Not because failure is somehow good, not because we should romanticize it, but because it forces a level of honest self-examination that success allows you to skip. When things go well, you can coast on luck and never develop true competence. You can tell yourself a flattering story about why you succeeded. But when things go wrong, with no one to blame but yourself, you must either learn or quit. The ego can't hide anymore. A woman I know spent 3 years building a consulting business that collapsed when her largest client, who represented 80% of her revenue, terminated their contract without warning. Overnight, she went from stable income to nothing. The panic was suffocating. But after the initial shock wore off, she did something unexpected. She analyzed every decision that had led to that vulnerability. Why had she let one client dominate her revenue? Fear of rejection when prospecting for others. Why hadn't she seen the warning signs? She'd been too focused on pleasing them to notice their shifting priorities. What could she do differently? Build a diversified client base, even if it meant slower growth. She rebuilt over 2 years. And the second version of her business was fundamentally sounder because failure had taught her what success never would have. So when you face a setback alone, with nobody there to comfort you or share the blame, resist the urge to immediately try again or give up entirely. Sit with it. Ask the hard questions. Let it teach you. What was my theory about how this would work? Where was that theory wrong? What does reality seem to want from me that I haven't been giving? What skill or knowledge would have changed this outcome? These questions turn failure from a dead end into a crossroads. And at those crossroads, real advancement begins. Because wisdom isn't something you're born with, it's something you extract from the wreckage of what didn't work. 6, build your legacy before your audience. The final principle is perhaps the most counterintuitive. When you're trying to get ahead, conventional wisdom says, network, promote yourself, get visible, build an audience, create buzz, make noise so people know you exist. But Jung would argue something radically different. Build the work first, the authentic work that emerges from your actual self, not your persona. Build it in silence. Build it so well that when people finally discover it, the work speaks louder than any marketing ever could. Your persona, in Jungian terms, is the mask you wear for the world. It's necessary for social functioning, the version of yourself that navigates professional settings and makes small talk. But it's not real. It's adaptive, a tool. Yourself, on the other hand, is the totality of who you are. Conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, integrated and whole. When you're alone, with nobody watching, you have a rare opportunity most people never get. You can build something that emerges from self rather than persona, something real most people create for approval. They're constantly adjusting based on feedback, tweaking to please algorithms, chasing trends they don't care about. This produces work that's polished but hollow. It lacks what Jung called numinosity, that quality of depth that makes something resonate beyond its surface, that makes people feel something they can't quite name. When you build alone, you can prioritize depth over reach, substance over style, truth over popularity. You can take the time to make something that actually reflects what you believe, what you've learned, what matters to you beyond metrics. A musician I studied spent 5 years writing an album independently. He recorded in his apartment, produced it himself, worked on it while holding down a day job. He had complete freedom, which also meant complete responsibility. Nobody to tell him it was good enough or ready to release. The deadline was his own standards, which kept rising as he grew. He could have released something quick to gain traction, to start building a following, to monetize his effort. But something deeper was calling. Every time he thought about releasing, something felt incomplete. Not perfect, but incomplete, like he hadn't yet said what he actually wanted to say. So he kept working, rewriting lyrics that felt clever but hollow, stripping arrangements back to their essence, sitting with the songs in silence to see if they still moved him months later, building not for streams or sales, but for the person he was becoming. When he finally released it independently, the response was modest at first. A few hundred listeners, quiet appreciation. But it grew slowly, spreading through genuine connection rather than algorithmic manipulation. Word of mouth, people sharing it with friends, saying this feels different. A decade later, it's considered a classic in its genre. Critics call it timeless. But he knew why. I didn't make music for an audience, he told me. I made it for the person I was becoming. Turns out, a lot of people were becoming that person too. This is the paradox of building before your audience arrives. When you create from authentic self rather than calculated persona, you actually create something more universally resonant. Because the self, at its deepest levels, is connected to what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared patterns and archetypes that unite all humans. Work that emerges from this depth speaks to something beyond individual taste. It touches the universal through the specific. That's why certain books, certain films, certain songs transcend their moment. They weren't made for a market. They were made from truth. Practically, this means stop checking metrics. Stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. Stop adjusting your vision based on what's trending this week. Instead, ask yourself a question that cuts through all the noise. If I knew no one would ever see this, would I still make it? And would I make it this way? If the answer is no, you're building on sand. If the answer is yes, you're building on bedrock. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. When you're getting ahead alone, you have the space to look, to ask what you actually care about beneath the performance, to build something that represents your genuine investigation of life, not your performance of success." And ironically, this is what makes people pay attention when they finally discover you. Not because you marketed well, but because you built something undeniably real, something with weight. People can feel the difference between work made for approval and work made from necessity. The people who get furthest ahead alone are often those who wait the longest to seek an audience. They use their obscurity as protection, as a greenhouse, where delicate things can grow without the harsh wind of public opinion. By the time they emerge, what they've built has its own integrity. It doesn't need constant propping up or defending. It stands because it's solid. Think of it like the difference between a building and a stage set. A stage set looks real from one angle, but collapses if you push it. A building takes longer to construct, but once it's done, it can withstand storms. Most people build stage sets because they're faster, more impressive in the short term, but they're always secretly worried someone will push too hard and expose the hollowness. When you build your legacy before your audience, you're constructing something real, something that can support weight. And when people eventually find it, they don't just consume it and move on, they return to it. They tell others. They feel like they've discovered something rare. So if you're working in obscurity right now, building something no one's asking for, creating for reasons you can barely articulate, understand this, you're not behind. You're exactly where the deepest work happens. The audience will come if what you're building is true. But they're not the reason you're building. You're building because something in you demands it. And that demand, that inner necessity, is the only sustainable fuel for getting ahead. If you're building something real right now, something that comes from who you actually are rather than who you think you should be, share this video. Because maybe someone else needs to know they're not crazy for working in silence, for choosing depth over visibility, for building their legacy before anyone's watching. If you're trying to get ahead right now with nobody beside you, you're not at a disadvantage. You're at the beginning of a different kind of journey. One that will demand more from you, but will also give you something others never acquire. Complete self-reliance and the deep satisfaction of knowing that everything you've built, you built with your own hands. Jung spent years developing his theories in isolation after his break with Freud. The psychiatric establishment considered his ideas mystical and unscientific. His colleagues had moved on, pursuing careers in conventional psychiatry. The academic world treated him like a relic of outdated thinking. During those years, what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he continued anyway. Writing, researching, exploring territories of the human psyche that others dismissed or feared. He could have quit. He could have gone back to conventional psychiatry and secured his reputation. But something deeper kept him working. He later wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." When no one is there for you, you face that choice in its purest form. Will you choose to become? Or will you wait for someone to make you? Will you carry your own potential, learn from your isolation, direct your own progress, practice strategic patience, transform your failures, and build something real? Or will you spend your energy wishing the circumstances were different? The path ahead may be lonely, but loneliness is not the same as being lost. You know where you're going. You're going toward the fullest expression of who you actually are. And every step you take alone, without applause or guidance, is a step that truly belongs to you. Nobody can take it away. Nobody can diminish it, because you earned it in the only way that matters, through your own commitment when it would have been easier to quit. One day, you'll look back at this period, the time when nobody was there, and you'll realize something surprising. You weren't alone. You were just finally meeting yourself. And that meeting, that integration of all you are and all you're capable of becoming, is the real advancement. Everything else, the success, the recognition, the audience, those are just byproducts. So keep walking, keep building, keep becoming. Not for the audience that isn't there yet, but for the person you're becoming in the process. Because that person, the one being forged in this solitary fire, is the one who'll actually reach the summit. And when you get there, you'll know something others don't. You didn't just get ahead, you became who you were always meant to be. If this message resonates with you, if you're on this path right now, share it. Not for validation, but to light the way for someone else walking through their own darkness. Because while we each must travel alone, knowing others have walked this path makes the journey feel less impossible. And subscribe, because this exploration of what it means to truly individuate and advance is just beginning. The journey of becoming yourself, steady, clear, and free, even when no one stands beside you. The best insights aren't behind us. They're ahead, waiting to be discovered in the work only you can do.